Hey, Defy Dementia listeners, we need you. Take a quick survey and enter a raffle for a gift card. Your insights about our podcast, our infographics, and our minute videos will help us maximize our impact so that we can help everyone defy dementia. Click the link in the episode description or on defydementia.org to get started. Thank you so much for your support and for being part of our community. Welcome back to the Community of Innovation podcast brought to you by the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, otherwise known as CABHI. I'm Allison Sekuler, President and Chief Scientist at CABHI and at the Baycrest Academy for Research and Education.
And I'm Rosanne Aleong, Executive Director of Research, Innovation, and Translation at the Baycrest Academy and the Director of Research, Innovation, and Translation at CABHI. As we approach the end of 2023, the CABHI Community of Innovation team is bringing you a special Season 4 compilation episode featuring highlights from our listeners' favorite episodes. You'll also hear from our production team as we talk about what these episodes meant to us. But before we get to the production team, Allison, what stood out for you in our Season 4?
Well, I love all of the episodes that we're going to be featuring today, but I'm not going to go into those since people will hear about them. The two other ones that I want to highlight are from the very beginning and the very end of the season, the bookends, if you will. The first one, appropriately, was about day one. So what happens day one of a dementia diagnosis? And we had an amazing guest with lived experience named Jim Mann, who spoke about his own personal experience. And we had other guests as well. But I think Jim stood out for me, sharing his perspective of what it was like to be diagnosed with dementia. And I think that I've heard so many people, whether it's having their own diagnosis or people who are concerned about family members, this episode really is a useful episode for anybody who is concerned about themselves or their loved ones, and to have some idea what to expect. And we, of course, highlight iGeriCare, which is a terrific innovation that CABHI funded coming out of McMaster and Hamilton Health Sciences that provides so much information for people in terms of what to expect with a diagnosis. The last episode that we just had, I actually just re-listened to it myself, is all about AI, everything you ever wanted to know, and even things you didn't know that you needed to know. And, AI, everyone's talking about it right now. It's been around for a long time, but it's really been raised in the public profile. And if you need to understand what AI is, how it can be used to help older people live their best lives, to defy dementia, this is the episode for you. So those for me were the other two episodes that we really could have included in this compilation as well. What about you? What else stood out?
So I get to cheat a little because I'm actually part of the production team later on in the episode.
I know.
But if I'm allowed to highlight a couple of other episodes, I'd like to highlight two other topics and episodes that we focused on this year. I think one is such an important topic for us to have discussed, which is financial abuse among older adults. That there are so many older adults that are facing, individuals who are trying to, perhaps gather their personal information, access their financial resources. And our special guests offer a lot of good, actionable tips and advice on how older adults and their families and their circle can protect themselves and to, live in a world where there might be these individuals trying to take advantage, but how can they actually just keep themselves safe? So I think that's really important for our audience and their families to know. And then the other are two colleagues of ours, Allison, including, adjunct scientists at the Rotman Research Institute at the Baycrest Academy. And that's our colleagues, Natasha Raja and Jillian Einstein, who came to us to talk about the importance of looking at aging from a sex and gender lens, realizing that women's health, that looking at brain health and aging journeys through that lens is so important so that we can really create personalized, individualized, and tailored journeys for every individual. And I think that message really came through, in our conversation with Natasha and Jillian.
Absolutely. Great episodes. So let's get to the show.
Hi, I'm Monique from the production team. The episode I selected is Love Out Loud: Sexuality, Intimacy, and Aging Part 1, featuring Maggie Perquin, a wife, mother, retired teacher and caregiver, and Sylvia Davidson, a retired occupational therapist. Apart from being one of our most listened to podcasts, it's also edgy, relevant, and deeply personal. We dedicated this episode to Maggie's wife, Ruth Martin, who recently passed away after living with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. In this episode, our guests dive into unexpected relationship changes that can follow a dementia diagnosis, the unique challenges for 2S LGBTQI+ couples, and the importance of having conversations about one's sexuality and intimacy needs, especially in healthcare settings.
Maggie, what are your thoughts on why should we be talking about intimacy in these cases?
Because it's a normal part of life, as is aging, as is sexuality. It is who we are. It is how we express ourselves. And we need to normalize it. We don't need to make it taboo. And we know what the being taboo has done. And we know about the years and years of abuse at all levels. And we just need to normalize it. We need it to be an acceptable thing. We all know that we express our sexuality in different ways. We express our intimacy in different ways, but we don't ever talk about it because that makes you so vulnerable. And I think that our youth now are very entrenched in a fluid world of sexuality. And so it is becoming a little easier for that age group. I look at my grandchildren who are, 14 and older, who are beginning to express their sexuality and are far more comfortable talking about it than, I didn't know the word lesbian until I was in my 20s, for Pete's sake, right? So they've grown up with lesbian Nana and Nana too. And so it's just all they've ever known and obviously very comfortable for them. And I'm grateful that they are starting to be able to express themselves that way. Intimacy is still uncomfortable for all of us. Sometimes they'll say to me, Nana, go get a room. But, it's okay. I'm allowed to hug her. I'm allowed to kiss her in front of you. It's okay because that's how you express your love for people.
Something that I've often asked someone when I'm seeing them in the home, when I realize there's two beds, are you sleeping separately? And are you okay with that? And a lot of people don't even want to start with that kind of a question. But as an occupational therapist, we ask a lot of things about very intimate things like toileting, for example, but we don't want to go down that route of opening the door to a very messy, complicated discussion. If we don't at least open the door to the discussion, we're missing out on an opportunity to find out more about this person, to understand who they are, that will help us give them better care. And that goes for basic dementia care. Never mind layering on the fact that they have slept in the same bed with someone for 50 years, and now we're putting them in a single bed and they don't have that kicking, farting, burping person right beside them. How do you blame someone for getting up and looking for a comfort in a bed if we've suddenly taken it away from them? And when you say it like that, it kind of makes sense. But the systems don't seem to allow us to get to that level of understanding that will help us better care for the individual.
So I want to build on that, and I want to turn to, I think, Maggie, you talked a little bit about the fact that Ruth's journey and your journey with her was an evolving one. Can you share with our audience, what did that dementia journey, how did that impact your connection? Speaking to Sylvia's point, it's about connection, that relationship, that comfort. How did you and Ruth maintain your connection over this period of time and this continuing evolution?
It certainly did evolve. And so people think, like, there's a whole lot of myths about dementia. And the first thing is people think you lose your memory. And again, with most of the dementias, that's often one of the last things that happens. With Alzheimer's in particular, because it is a different kind of a dementia, the personality change is far more prominent than the beginnings of the memory loss. Memory loss appears earlier in Alzheimer's because of the tau buildup in your brain. But, so it's different. And I think we need to begin to understand that. Ruth's memory was long-term memory was incredible. And as you progress through dementia, your base of memory changes. It goes further and further and further back. And so our 25 years together were pretty much gone for her in the latter stages. And she would insert me into stories she was telling from her 20s. Well, I wasn't even born in her 20s. And so that's what happens. And so therefore the priority of people in her life changed. And because in her long term, I mean, there's 17 years difference between us. So Ruth was 80, I'm 63. And so in the progression of her dementia, our 25 years was gone. Her family of origin became her base of norm at the very end of her journey. And so I lost my status as wife probably about 5 years ago. And I became the taskmaster and the provider and the cook, cleaner, bottle washer, chauffeur, all of those things. So I would get listed as that, but that position as primary precious person was gone. And so that again, it became lonely, and it's very hard for me to lose her in that way because I hadn't changed my position towards her, right? So it's really difficult. And I talked about as her level of apathy increased, then it didn't seem to matter that all the things that I was doing for her so she could maintain her independence and quality of life as much as possible. And so there's all these losses that you experience along the way. Dementia is a mean disease because it steals your person. And again, depending on what kind you have, it doesn't necessarily steal their memory until well into it. So for us, short-term memory loss has only been within the last year. So I always kept photo albums out so that we had things to look at that would prompt conversations, because processing of information was one of the first things that started to be impacted. Her balance has been bad for a number of years now. So I was just I always say I lived on a yoga ball. I was always having to shift to be able to stay in balance with what the newest decline was. And I did that because I love her and I wanted her to have a quality of life. I wanted her to maintain her dignity and her independence as long as possible.
I'm going to add my thanks for sharing your journey with us, Maggie, so honestly. I'm also going to ask Sylvia. Maggie talks about the impact of the evolving relationship on her and these losses that occur in her relationship. How do you think the system or healthcare providers or peer support should be helping partners manage those losses or help support them through those losses? Sylvia, I don't know if there's an easy answer to that, but I'm going to turn to you just as kind of.
So no, there is no easy answer, but I will come back again to sort of an underlying theme that we've had today, and that's this need to start talking about it. I would say blanket statement, healthcare providers need to take a step back and stop, and even if it's just wondering how the partner might be doing, and maybe asking and not just taking, yeah, everything's fine superficially. I've worked with individuals who are angry. Maggie, you described a perfect example of why I think many care partners are angry, because you've done everything you were told to do and you've read the books and you know what you're supposed to do, and yet you feel that you failed because I'm not getting what I thought I was going to get, and the relationship isn't right. I've worked with people who are consumed with guilt because their partner no longer recognizes them. The relationship is done, but they're still looking for something, and they find it elsewhere. And they feel that that is a fundamental betrayal of everything that they had with their spouse. And they never talk about it because they don't know how to. I mean, if we can't talk about the very basics, how do we talk about the fact that someone has actually gone out for coffee with somebody else because they just wanted that kind of a connection, got a massage from someone just like you and Ruth used to get a massage, Maggie? The guilt that consumes people is overwhelming, and that's wrong, because it doesn't mean that you don't love your partner. It doesn't mean that you don't still have all those feelings for them, but that relationship has changed. And there are certain elements of it that maybe you still need. I think that sometimes it's very hard also if you are the partner of someone who is in an institution. They have somehow found a way to make a connection, and they're starting to have a relationship with someone else in the setting. And that can be a huge problem. And what do we do as healthcare providers? We dismiss it, or we hide it, or we shut it down, and then we make the call to the family to tell them that we have a problem. And I've worked with staff in all of those different realms, and none of them are the right way to handle this. But you see, we didn't start by having a conversation. We don't understand that this person is looking for companionship and comfort because they've always been that touchy-feely kind of person. And just because they reach out to touch your hand doesn't mean that they want to fight with you. They're looking for that contact. And if we understood the person better, maybe we would be better able to support them and their partner. And we let people down with that. We really do. And again, I come back to the fact that if we would just talk about it, if we were more comfortable talking about it at an earlier stage, I think it would make such a difference.
I think that dementia does have gifts. It slows you down. It makes you be simple because you can't be complex anymore because she can't process all of that stuff. So it makes you be simple. It makes you value those moments in your life and going through those photo albums and really relishing and treasuring those moments.
Hi, I'm Lisa from the production team. The episode that I most remember from season 4 was Navigating Driving and Dementia. When my father-in-law, who's living with Alzheimer's disease, had to stop driving, he was so frustrated and angry because that loss of freedom embarrassed him. Suddenly, he was dependent on family and friends to drive him to church, to the farm store, to the grocery store. We were already, as a family, trying to manage his shock and grief after his Alzheimer's diagnosis. His anger was unexpected. Maybe it shouldn't have been. So Mary Beth's reaction to the abrupt demand from her doctor to stop driving resonates with me. As we'll hear, losing one's driver's license is not simply an end to an activity. It's the end of a lifestyle, and that's a lot. This episode also introduces the award-winning Driving and Dementia Roadmap, funded in part by CABHI, and features Mary Beth Whiten, a dementia advocate, and doctors Gary Nagley and Mark Rappaport. Let's have a listen.
What it meant for me once I lost my license, it was really, it was a terrible way to receive the diagnosis, first of all. So the doctor sat me down, said, "You have probable frontotemporal dementia." And I don't even think she took a breath. And then she said, "And you can't drive effective immediately, period."
Wow.
And so what happened then was it was just like my brain couldn't even absorb the first part, which was the diagnosis. It went straight to you've lost your license effective immediately. And that's all I could hear. I stopped listening to her. I couldn't hear what she was saying at all. And I ended up stomping out of her office and waiting for my partner, Dawn, with the keys. And I had to hand those keys over to her, and she drove us home. It was definitely disrupted, lost, and, now it's almost I have to look to my bicycle to kinda if I wanna take off and go somewhere, so the whole spontaneity of life, and if you are a driver who enjoys driving, and you get that taken away from you, then it's a huge blow to your ego, it's a huge blow to who you are, and you definitely lose, for a long time, I would say, that wonderful feeling of getting into a car and driving.
I would just like to emphasize is when the issue of driving comes up, I think too many people focus almost exclusively on this being a means of transportation to get from point A to point B. But what Mary Beth so eloquently pointing out is driving means so much more to people than this, than just being a mode of transportation. People's sense of autonomy, their sense of self, and sometimes who they are. If part of their role in life is to drive their grandchildren to and from school and to and from their activities, and you take that away from them, you're taking away from them a major part of their life and what gives them a sense of fulfillment and contribution. And hopefully we'll get back to that a bit during the podcast so we can speak a bit more about the importance of addressing those issues.
It's a really important point because people sometimes will say, well, you could just get an Uber these days. But that doesn't really get to the core of what these issues are.
I was also going to say, getting your license is a huge milestone for many people. It's a rite of passage to become an adult. So losing it, I think, is equally a milestone in the opposite direction. Mark and Gary, can I follow up on Mary Beth's comment, does the driving and dementia roadmap hopefully help people in maintaining that sense of personhood? And is a tool in that sense? I don't jump in.
I'd like to think that it does. Some of the important aspect for people to understand is when they use the resource, the Driving Dementia Roadmap, is to recognize the work that went into it. And in fact, I know Allison and Rosanne probably relate to this. It was 7 years of background work and rigor to get us to the point. And some of that involved very extensive reviews of existing literature, a number of qualitative studies, having an advisory group of people with lived experience, as well as healthcare providers, really trying to understand the issues. And in our qualitative work, time and time again, the issues that Mary Beth emphasized about the importance of driving to people beyond just transportation, the very emotional aspects associated with driving. We developed sort of what we call an intervention framework, and we very specifically, 2 separate categories. One was called the practical aspects and all the things that we thought that the roadmap needed to address. And then we had a separate category, which was the emotional aspects and all the subcategories of that we felt that the roadmap had to address. And we hope that the roadmap does try to address some of the emotional aspects and give some suggestions. And certainly we talk about things like developing a transportation plan. But the notion of the transportation plan, again, although maybe we don't explicitly state it, is that it's meant to provide, again, some control for the person with dementia to do the activities that they want to do. And I guess the only other thing I'd emphasize, one of the underlying objectives of the roadmap is to get people with cognitive impairment at early stages to start addressing this issue so that they have the voice in making the decision to stop, and they have the voice in planning for what does life look like after they stop.
And Mark, I wonder if you can speak a little bit about what some of the early warning signs might be that folks would experience when it comes to driving difficulties. I mean, so you've talked before about the importance of catching it early, better early than late. Gary, you're talking also about how do you engage people earlier. So Mark, what would people be looking for? What are some of those early warning signs?
Yeah, everyone seems to think that it's really all about the most dramatic signs, like a car accident or mixing up the gas and brake pedals. Those happen later in the course of dementia. By that point, it's really dangerous. But there are some more subtle early warning signs that are important to know about. I think the most common one is a reduction of driving. So driving much less, driving in restricted circumstances. On the one hand, that's a wise thing to do, and accommodating to normal changes in age with night vision, that's a good, wise thing to do. On the other hand, in dementia, it can be an early warning sign that there's something up, there's something different that the person is aware of, and it may pertain to cognition. So it starts with a reduction in driving situations and total driving time and distance, but then, a loss of confidence. We have a lot of warning signs, by the way, on the driving and dementia roadmap. So these include difficulty turning to see when you're backing up. That's a very difficult task to do that can stop early. Sitting on the brake too much, being distracted, having trouble with getting the exact signal right or the timing of signaling. Families often tell me that they're noticing some unexplained scrapes or dents on the car or on the garage or a mailbox as people get into the road. And so those can be early things that people notice before things get more serious.
I'd love for us to have a collective conversation about what's the best approach to this topic with someone living with dementia. And Mary Beth, maybe having lived through that conversation personally, what would your advice be on how to tackle this type of conversation?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to consider before even broaching the topic, which is evaluating the relationships of the person who you're working with. So for instance, the person who's coming in with a daughter and they're not quote unquote loved ones, but they have a stressful relationship. And so for someone to suggest to the daughter, well, we really think it'd be best for you to talk about this, your mom not driving anymore. Well, that's probably not going to go very well for anybody. And so in that particular situation, what other things can we evaluate? For the doctor with me, just to lay it out there for two incredibly serious decisions thrown at me, obviously my brain can't take on all of that. It was a bad decision on her end. So what could have changed with that? First of all, we could have talked more about the demise of my ability cognitively to do those functional things that both Gary and Mark have been talking about. And so there's almost a lead up conversation. So Mary Beth, are you struggling a little bit with making decisions? Oh, yeah. And how, your money, you're still understanding your banking system. So bringing in those extra things outside driving that can help influence the decisions on how do we go forward with this, I think is a good guide.
So, as we close this episode, we always ask our guests for their recommendations about resources that our audience should check out. I have a strong suspicion of what Gary and Mark will offer, but I want them to actually tell our audience where to find the Driving and Dementia Roadmap. Mark, where should our audience go?
So the link for our website is drivinganddementia.ca, www.drivinganddementia.ca. And if you put that into your browser, that will take you to this roadmap that Gary and I and Mary Beth have been discussing today.
Perfect. Thank you. Mary Beth, what resource would you want our audience to check out?
I'll do a shout out to the Alzheimer's Society of Canada. They have done some amazing work on their web, and they have a whole section related to this. Go there, read, absorb, and talk.
And just to follow up on Mary Beth's comment, if I may, because I was going to say the Alzheimer's Society as well. So number one, on behalf of Mark, myself, and our research team, we'd like to thank the Alzheimer's Society because they have been great partners with us in assessing and implementing and giving us feedback. But in addition, when people connect with the local Alzheimer's Society, they are the most knowledgeable about transportation-related resources in the area that you live. So they can tell you about community driving resources, about maybe local shuttle buses from retirement homes that allow people who aren't in the retirement home but live in the nearby neighborhood to use to take them for grocery shopping and other types of activities. So it's a great resource. The local Alzheimer's Society will know about how they can help support you if you have to give up driving as well.
Hi, Rosanne here from the production team. Last but not least, we end the Season 4 compilation episode with CABHI's highest rated podcast of the year, Dr. Brent Chappell's spoken word presentation that kicked off our 2023 CABHI Summit. The brain is an amazing thing until it fails isn't your traditional keynote address, and it is breathtaking in its raw emotional honesty. Dr. Chappell talks about his mother-in-law and his own father's dementia journey in a loving but brutal manner. He worries aloud about what genetic legacy is lurking in his and his daughter's brains, and he begs researchers and innovators to not give up. He's Brent the poet, Brent the radiologist, Brent the dementia advocate. Grab a tissue and listen to highlights from his presentation. We couldn't have said it better ourselves.
My wife's mother had dementia. Hers was called Pick's disease. The name suits it because it picks at your brain like a carrion eater, taking certain bits but leaving others. In her case, it was beyond cruel, devouring huge swaths of her, but leaving a razor-sharp awareness of how much she had lost. And it also left untouched her great strength and pride, so she stayed proud enough to be unable to accept this shell of herself, and strong enough to sit in her cottage for what must have been hour after hour after hour, scratching at her crumbling memory for the words, to write last letters to her children, and then put on her coat, tighten the hood around her face, and walk far out into the lake. When I went into that bright, white room and they pulled back the sheet and said, "Is that her? Is that Margie Mehalina?" I hesitated. "Yes," I said finally. "I suppose it was once." Her mother had it too, and lay for a dark decade in a nursing home bed, her husband of 60 years visiting every morning at 10, talking to her and holding her hand, except for the days she pulled away, because she didn't want to be touched by a stranger. So it's in the family. And when my wife beats me at Scrabble, she says, looking over her shoulder, "Do you let me win?" "No, love, I don't let you win." And I pretend to grumble, but I'm so glad you still do. And now my father has it, and is getting pretty bad. So he doesn't remember much. But he remembers how to swing a golf club, and his body hasn't failed him, so we still golf together. It's not the same, though, because golf is mostly walking with someone, and our walks are so much quieter now. Because I can't ask him anymore what I'm doing wrong in my backswing, or how exactly you tell a person they have cancer, or what he had for breakfast. So we just walk. Sometimes Alzheimer's charges ahead like a freight train. Carolyn Bray, the wife of my lifelong best friend Scott, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's a couple of years ago at the age of 61. A year later, she was dead. A horrible, nasty, brutish death. Dad's illness has been much more gradual. A blessing, you might say? I suppose, in a way. But to me, more like a purposefully slow form of torture. Death by 1,000 cuts. I think I was the first one to notice something was wrong. Dad and I went on a golf trip to Scotland together, bucket list kind of thing. I hadn't seen him in a while, and during the trip, it struck me that something just wasn't quite right with him. The keenness, the sharpness of him seemed the tiniest bit dulled. That was 23 years ago. And since then, so many steps, an uncountable number of steps, inexorably downward. Those walks on the golf course are gone. The walks around the neighborhood where he lived for 35 years, near the hospital where he worked for 30 years, are gone too. His body can still walk pretty far, but his mind can't. My sister Karen and I went to visit him recently at Sherbrooke Community Centre, the nursing home where he lives now. He was having a good day and was able to manage a walk down the hall, and we came to the shuffleboard table. He seemed interested. He used to like shuffleboard and was good at it like he was at everything, so we reminded him what to do. His hand remembered how to hold the disc, but his first shot fell right off into the gutter, and he said, "I'm so stupid. I can't do anything. I want to go." For years, it's the second most common thing he says to us. Number one, "I love, love, love you." Number two, "I'm so stupid." It's such a grotesque and cruel irony, isn't it? One of the very few things his mind can still do is to understand that it can't understand anything. I don't know if I can properly describe the horror of watching someone you love be eaten away like this. It's like a priceless work of art being defaced. Like graffiti on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, like a Stradivarius left out in the rain, like bird shit on Michelangelo's David. And of course it's a horrible tragedy if this happens to anyone, any of the legions of people who've been struck down by it. It's an unfathomable and precious miracle what any of our minds can do. But why did it have to strike him? Why did it have to destroy that beautiful, beautiful mind? He should still be kicking ass at bridge. He should still be discussing the subtleties of Pinot Noirs at wine club. He should be living in his own home with his wife who misses him so much she can hardly breathe. He should at least know who she is when she comes to visit, for God's sake. He should know my daughter Georgia, his granddaughter, is now a surgeon herself. He should be sitting with her by the hour, discussing sutures and incisions and forceps and how exactly you care for a patient, how you deeply and truly care for a patient. He should still be helping me with that. Even at 89, he shouldn't have to feel stupid and helpless. Alzheimer's kills people. Millions of them. Well, then kill him. Please take what's left of him. I can't believe I'm saying this because I will miss him so much, but I already miss him so much. I want him to just not wake up one morning. I'm not sure I can bear to see him suffer like this anymore. I'm not sure I can bear to see any of us who love him suffer like this. Here's the deal. We need to figure this shit out. We need to understand what's happening to my dad's brain. We need a treatment. We need a cure. We need to find a way of stopping this from ever even beginning in anyone. We need to make dementia research a priority like we have for heart disease and cancer. We need to make sure the people who do this research have everything they need. We need to revere them. It's not optional. Because how it is now, for my dad, for the countless other people with this god-awful condition, how it is now is not okay. It's not. It's not just what happens when you get old. Listen, the research will pay off. I know it will. I've seen it pay off with other diseases. Of course, it's going to take time. The money my wife Susan and I donate to Alzheimer's research today isn't going to help Dad. It probably won't help us. But we see it as a gift to our daughters, who live with the dread of the twin genetic ticking time bombs we have so unwillingly given them. Until then, until that earth-shattering eureka moment in some lab somewhere someday, or more likely, until 1,000 tiny eurekas on 1,000 different days come together to free us from this never-ending nightmare, we need help. We, the people who have or will have dementia, we, the people who care for or will care for those who have it, God, we need help. So I am incredibly grateful that there are organizations working very hard to provide that help. Organizations like the Alzheimer's Society of Canada and the Alzheimer's Society of Saskatchewan in my home province. They do provide support every day to people like Dad and the families of those people to help us survive, maybe even thrive. And I'm immensely grateful that organizations like CABHI exist, supporting researchers and innovators looking not just for a treatment or a cure, but for new ways to help people with dementia in their everyday lives. On New Year's Day this year, Dad walked from his room in Sherbrooke out into the common area. And in front of the people gathered there, other residents, visiting loved ones, my dad, my previously smart, capable, dignified father, pulled down his pants and defecated on the floor. I think he just forgot where the bathroom was. Or he forgot that people don't do that. Could there be someone out there who could find a way to help him with that? To help the good people looking after him with that? I don't have the faintest idea how you would do it. Put a sensor in his butt that sends an alarm to the nurses? I don't know. But I say this to the people working in this field, racking your brains, scratching and clawing for funding. Don't give up. Please, I beg you, do not give up until you find a way to help my dad with that. With all of it. I know for some of you this is just a job. Maybe you even see the epidemic of dementia as a business opportunity. But I'm guessing for most of you, it's personal, like it is for me. So my heart goes out to you for the suffering in your families, among the people you love, the suffering that drew you to this work. One last thing. To government, to philanthropic organizations, to individual ordinary people, I say this. Brilliant researchers do give up all the time. They have to. There is just not enough money to allow them to continue. It's a disgrace how underfunded Alzheimer's research is. Our families' lives will be devastated. Our dementia will be an ever-growing juggernaut spreading devastation throughout our whole society, throughout our whole world. We all need to act now. So let's get on with it.
Thank you to all our guests for spending time with us and for sharing their knowledge and insights this season. And thank you to all of our listeners. I hope you've enjoyed the best season so far. And we also want to thank our podcast production team, including Monique, Cheng, and Lisa Hartford, and our friends over at Podtex.
To learn more about CABHI, please visit us at CABHI.com. That's CABHI.com. We'd also love your support of our podcast, so be sure to follow us and leave a review on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your pods. We also tried a new approach this year, and our Day 1 episode is available as a video on YouTube. So please check out the CABHI YouTube channel to see that and to find our entire Community of Innovation podcast playlist.
And if you're looking for even more podcasts, Rosanne and I have been working on a new podcast series, which she is executive producing and I'm co-hosting, along with science journalist and broadcaster Jay Ingram. And that is called Defy Dementia. And it is a podcast for anyone with a brain. Each episode is focusing on a different modifiable risk factor for dementia. It provides inspiring stories from people who have lived experience, along with a discussion of the science behind dementia. And it also includes simple lifestyle hacks that you can make to decrease your dementia risk or slow the progression of the disease if you've already been diagnosed.
So check out Defy Dementia at defydementia.org, since you are never too young or too old to take care of your brain. The CABHI Community of Innovation podcast team is also incredibly excited about our upcoming Season 5. Hard to believe, but Season 5 is coming. Launching in early 2024 with a slate of amazing topics and guests. So please stay tuned for more envelope-pushing content coming your way.
Happy holidays, everyone.